welcome to our explainer. Today, we're diving into a structural analysis that is absolutely going to change how you look at a very, very heavy word, slavery. You know, we usually think of it as this abolished historical practice, right? Something safely locked away in the history books. But the materials we're unpacking today present a really compelling and frankly kind of unsettling argument. They suggest that slavery didn't actually disappear at all. It just evolved into an insidious, invisible modern reality. So let's tackle this provocative question right out of the gate. If physical chains are supposedly a thing of the past, and we're living in this era of unprecedented human rights, why do so many of us feel more exhausted, more indebted, and more trapped than ever before? Well, the source material suggests a pretty bold answer. We haven't eradicated enslavement. We've just gotten really, really good at hiding it. To get to the bottom of this, we're going to break things down into 5 key areas. Number 1, the illusion of freedom. Number 2, intellectual enslavement. 3, the enslavement of desires. 4, contemporary slavery. And finally, number 5, modern slave markets. We are going to systematically explore these invisible chains binding our minds, our hearts, and our bodies.
Starting with Section 1, the illusion of freedom, defining the core concepts. Before we go any further, we really need to set a baseline from the text about what true freedom actually means, and how it differs from servitude.
It's super fascinating how the source distinguishes between 2 radically different ideas here. On one side, you have ubidiyya, which translates to willful devotion. This is submission that comes from a place of love, reverence, and completely free choice. But on the flip side, there's istibad, and that is forced subjugation. It's exploitation. It's being coerced against your will, whether that's through outright fear or through really clever manipulation.
The ultimate takeaway here is that modern enslavement isn't about someone physically owning your neck anymore. It's about the invisible subjugation of our minds, our deepest desires, and the systems we live in. Because the reality is, if you don't consciously choose what you're devoted to, well, a master is just going to be chosen for you by default.
And that brings us perfectly to Section 2, intellectual enslavement. Because before you can control a body, you absolutely have to capture the mind. This source text makes a totally chilling point here. When your critical thinking gets paralyzed by outside narratives, you become entirely passive. The analogy they use is striking. An intellectually enslaved person becomes just like a sheep willingly walking up to the butcher. They have zero awareness of their own subjugation.
So how exactly does this happen? Well, your mind gets caged when it surrenders to modern myths and superstitions, or when you just blindly follow the herd mentality without pausing to think for yourself. It happens when we get locked into deep, unexamined habits. And perhaps most powerfully, the text points to the worship of modern false idols. Today, those aren't physical statues, right? They're abstract concepts like extreme nationalism, where people willingly sacrifice their personal morals and their critical thought for the sake of a political slogan. Okay, but what happens when those chains move down from our abstract thoughts and start wrapping around our deepest, most primal urges? Let's look at Section 3, Enslavement of Desires, the Chains of the Heart. The text outlines how perfectly natural human drives are systematically weaponized to control us from the inside out. I mean, we all have biological and psychological needs. That's just being human. But when these needs are artificially inflated by society and left totally unchecked, they morph. They stop being simple biological functions, and they turn into tyrannical masters. The source breaks this down into 4 primary appetites: the relentless pursuit of wealth, the endless hunger for power and status, the overindulgence in food, and being completely consumed by lust. We've all been there, right? Falling down a rabbit hole of targeted ads, buying things we definitely don't need. But when a culture actively pushes us to constantly feed these 4 desires, we actually lose our agency. We turn into exhausted servants to our own appetites, running on a treadmill where the finish line just keeps getting pushed further away.
Now, how does all of this scale up to a global level? That's Section 4, contemporary slavery and systemic exploitation. Let's see how our personal vulnerabilities, our intellectual blind spots and unchecked desires are engineered into a massive, inescapable global machine. Like we said earlier, physical slavery supposedly vanished. But the source argues it actually just got a legal makeover. Instead of formally owning human bodies, the modern system exploits human effort, human time, and human dignity. And it does this through incredibly complex, deeply entrenched, and perfectly legal systemic frameworks. This modern exploitation basically operates on 3 main tiers. First, you have unbalanced international laws.
The text explicitly points to mechanisms like UN veto powers, which legally lock in a global hierarchy where powerful nations dictate the fate of weaker ones. Second, restrictive local labor laws. Think about the kafala, or sponsorship system, which essentially chains a worker's legal existence and freedom of movement to a single employer. And third, insidious social customs. These are the cultural norms that degrade manual laborers and literally normalize the subjugation of society's most vulnerable people.
And to put all this into perspective, just consider the global economic trap. The source paints this really devastating picture. Poor nations are constantly borrowing, working like oxen tied to a water wheel, just endlessly turning but going absolutely nowhere. Meanwhile, wealthy global entities basically act as international loan sharks. They control the flow of capital and only pump the blood of the economy into areas that serve their own interests. It's a literal financial leash.
And you might be wondering, how do they get away with this?
Well, the analysis points a massive finger at modern media as the ultimate enforcer of this entire system. It freezes our critical thinking, it distracts us with endless cycles of entertainment, and it normalizes our chains. Sometimes it even twists the narrative entirely, portraying the victims of this system as the offenders. The media's job is basically to make our beautifully decorated cage look like it's the entire universe.
So let's bring this all together in our final section. Section 5, Modern Slave Markets, the Invisible Bazaar.
When you put the past and the present side by side like this, the contrast is just staggering. In ancient markets, people were stripped of their clothes. Today, they are stripped of their independent thoughts and morals. Ancient markets took place in dirty public squares. Modern ones operate silently, right through the glowing screens in our living rooms. The old enslaver was a specific person. The new enslaver is a faceless, giant global corporation. But the absolute most terrifying difference, the ancient enslaved person knew exactly what they were. The modern enslaved person is completely intoxicated by the illusion that they are entirely free.
I really want to pause on this quote from the source because it hits incredibly hard. While the ancient world exposed bodies in town squares, modern markets expose our minds and our behavioral data right in the perceived safety of our homes. And the real tragedy? We don't just accept it, we eagerly embrace it, all under this comforting, warm illusion of progress and connectivity. So what's the big takeaway from all of this? I think we all need to pause and ask ourselves some really tough questions. What modern idols are we blindly following? What manufactured desires are driving us into debt? What invisible corporate algorithms are currently holding our leashes and dictating how we view the world? Because identifying the chain is literally the only way you can ever break it. I want to leave you with this final, vital thought to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. Are you truly a free, independent thinker making your own choices? Or have you simply grown comfortable in a much larger, beautifully decorated cage? Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. Let this framework challenge how you interact with the world around you.